Okay, Stephen.
Yeah, I was sort of contemplating the nature of the existence of objects. I know last week you sort of gave that example of the brush and where it was located, and the existence of objects. So I was thinking about it, and I was thinking, so the brush exists, or any object exists in my own consciousness, but it exists, well, it exists in everybody's consciousness as if they sort of pay attention to it. But then when you don't pay attention to it, then that object doesn't have any independent existence of its own. So I suppose my question is, without the consciousness of human beings, does that object continue to exist in Mithya? You know, does the whole world of Mithya, does it stay in an apparent existence without human beings shining their light on it?
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. It's a profound question, a philosophical question.
Yeah.
It's very often asked, you know, if there are no human jivas to reveal, to know the object, to know them intelligently.
Yeah.
The moment that we have the creation, and then if we have only inert objects, and then inert objects are objects without a subtle body, and don't reflect consciousness, therefore they cannot exercise their faculty of knowing and experiencing. Okay? But then all other living beings, conscious creatures, you know, a cockroach, an insect, or a germ, thing. It's a knowing, experiencing entity. It experiences its environment. So, but you know, the environment of an object like an insect can be so limited to one small area of our planet, for example, you know, as opposed to others. And then somebody who lives in South Africa has experience only around his own environment, as opposed to people who lives on the Antarctic, for example, you know?
Yeah.
So that way, every human being, every jiva, every human jiva is going to see the world around him, their environment, the world. Jagata is mostly defined by our environment, because we know jivas are limited by all means. We are not omnipresent, omnipotent, all-knowing, etc., etc.
Yeah.
We know and experience what is around me, or whatsoever my mind goes and contemplates, and then I may know. We can know by direct experience, direct perceptive contact with the object, perception, but we can know by contemplate, studying, analyzing, you know, and we can know things which are far beyond even our planet, okay, by putting in, using some equipments that can expand my capacity of seeing and hearing, and so all these equipments are to amplify our sense organs, right? So all these living beings, they can know. But how about your question? How about a universe or a planet where there is no life, but there are objects, only rocks? Okay?
Yeah,
rocks in this object, in this planet. So is there consciousness there? Yes, consciousness is there, because consciousness is all pervading. It's all pervasive. Okay, the most fundamental nature of consciousness is pervasiveness. It penetrates and sustains and pervades everything like space does in relation to all other elements that evolve out of space. So consciousness is there, but consciousness is there without a vehicle of knowing, okay? So, and then the objects are there, but consciousness is deprived of a means of knowledge, a body of knowledge, vehicle of knowledge. So, and then in this case, those objects, although they exist, they are not witnessed by any conscious being, because there are no sentient creatures there.
Yeah.
They exist from the standpoint of Ishvara and pure consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
But pure consciousness or Ishvara is the creator of all objects. From the point of view of consciousness and Ishvara, this object cannot be really experientially known unless consciousness, with the aids of Maya and then Ishvara, have a proper means of knowledge, vehicle or instrument of knowing the field. That's why by and by Ishvara, Maya produce also living beings, so that this creation can become some sort of funny game, of Ishvara or Maya or consciousness itself getting to know itself, because it's all the self, but the self can know itself only by the means of an instrument, a vehicle, a means of knowledge, which are, what is a means of knowledge? There are many ways to look into means of knowledge. Means of knowledge is anything that allows, it's something that allows something else to know, okay, something to be captured. So there are many things by which things can be known. The most fundamental example of a means of knowledge is light, because light is that by which things are known. That's why the scriptures, they are very often compared consciousness, we say the light of consciousness. Why? Because light, our sunlight, our physical light, is a means of knowledge without which things are not revealed, things are not known, things are not seen. Okay? The light is a nice symbol. Mm-hmm. That way, also, what is another means of knowledge? Our sense organs. We have 5 sense organs. Each one of those is a means of knowledge. Okay? So without our eyes, we miss out on many aspects of this beautiful creation. We can hear, we can smell, we can touch it, but we cannot really see it. Okay? So all our 5 sense organs means to know something. So what else is a means of knowledge? Our mind, because the mind is the one which integrates all these sense perceptions into one single experience / knowledge. Okay? So the mind is the means of knowledge as well. Okay? But when we step back from the object, the sense instruments, the mind, and then we go beyond the mind, and then we realize that consciousness alone is the real means of knowledge. Because without consciousness, nothing can be revealed, nothing can be illuminated, nothing can be known. Okay? But consciousness is not a doer of anything. Does consciousness do any action to reveal the world to these living creatures? No. It's the nature of consciousness is one, which is to shine. Okay, it's self-shining, it's self-luminous. But only when it reflects on the jiva, it becomes a illuminer of its field of action. So the jiva is the one who is going to say, oh, I see, I do, I perceive, I know, etc., etc. Okay? So the jiva is the doing, knowing experience entity, instrument, vehicle of consciousness. Okay? So ultimately, the real means of knowledge is consciousness, pure consciousness. Okay? So from the standpoint of consciousness, so the world is there, there are no living creatures, but it is still there, it exists, okay? It's just that consciousness and Ishvara, from the standpoint of consciousness and Ishvara, this world exists. This world of only inert, this planet of only rocks exists, okay? There is no life. There are not even bacteria or anything, but it exists from the standpoint of consciousness and Ishvara, but not from the standpoint of the jiva, because jivas did not yet develop in that environment, for example. Okay? So it's the same thing. There is a forest, and then there is a storm. In the middle of the night, a tree, a huge 1,000-year-old tree collapsed. Mm-hmm. Okay? But there was nobody there to witness it. Nobody there to know, to experience anything. And then the philosophical question is, did the tree really fall? Did the tree really fall? Huh? So nobody has experienced it, so nobody knows. So maybe consciousness, if consciousness, human consciousness is not present, and then it means it does not validate any event. No, it's not really like that. Because in the forest, there are many other creatures, and they are going to perceive a big bang from a tree collapsing. Mm-hmm. So from the standpoint of all these other jivas, the tree has fallen. From the standpoint of Ishvara, the tree has fallen. From the standpoint of consciousness, the tree has fallen in the middle of the night. But it has not fallen to the jivas, because there were no jivas to capture that. Okay? But even in that example, the tree was not known to the jiva when it fell. But in retrospect, later on, the forest guard or whatever, going around, and then they report, oh, a huge tree has fallen. And then in retrospect, the tree fell for the jiva, because we have a means of, by inference, to know if it's in the ground is because it fell and the fall was big, huge, and it damaged other creatures, damaged other trees, and so on. I don't know, does it answer your question?
Yeah, I think, it's there's a lot to sort of, think about with relation to that, just because, Maya kind of keeps you sort of thinking that the objects are sort of out there, but...
Yeah, the purpose of that demonstration that I did is to show that every object exists not separate from consciousness. And we do that by demonstrating that they are not separate from the mind. Mm-hmm. And we reason and discern, since consciousness pervades everything, it pervades the mind as well. So if this object appears in the mind, and since consciousness pervades the mind, it's this object, and all object appears not separate from consciousness. Mm-hmm. It appears in consciousness. In consciousness, as consciousness, since there is only consciousness, because the nature of reality is Consciousness is consciousness, non-duality.
Thank you.
So that was the purpose. That's the purpose of this teaching, location of the objects. Hello, everybody.
Good afternoon, Arlindo. Good afternoon, everybody.
Hi.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. Hi.
Good morning, Arlindo. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, or good afternoon.
Money.
So just, Arlindo, I'll have to leave a little bit early.
Okay.
Just today.
Yeah. We'll keep trying. So we'll see. There were 2 people from that asked the class to be a little earlier. If they don't make, today and other days, and then we may disregard that request, and then we may reconsider. From my standpoint, it's a little bit better. Today, it's not a big deal because my wife is in France, but here in Italy, to have lunch with your mother-in-law and father-in-law and so on, it's a tradition. So we do that at least twice a month. And then to come to rush, start having lunch at 12:31 and to rush to be here at 2:30, it's doable. But if I have a little bit more room, I prefer.
So this is the preferred time for you.
This is a preferred time for me. So 3:30, we could consider just saying 3:30. You see, I said 4, but I would open for questions a little earlier, 3:30, 3:40. Because I know that every class may produce questions, and questions they need to be resolved, and by and by. Okay.
I keep inviting people, so we shall see if they're listening to the recording or how they might avail themselves at all.
Yeah, it takes time. We have a few of us from our Brazilian Sangha here. We have Gustavo and Jose, and so we have a very large Sangha there, but it took years to develop. And I have no expectation. The same way I have no expectation here. It's just it was born out of you, Carla. You said, "Oh, let's try to get together."
Yeah.
And we'll see what Ishwar is going to do of this, if it's going to make it sprout and grow or not.
Yeah.
Yep, that sounds perfect.
Yeah.
Less is more sometimes.
Huh?
Less is more sometimes.
Less is more, yeah. Yeah, less is more, especially when you are... when you are a mumukshutva. Once you are a seeker or inquirer into the true nature of reality, you better do less and have less, because having more requires more energy to maintain. Doing more, it takes away a lot of energy. So this is a nice saying for us, since we want to inquire, to know, we simplify our lives, because less is more. Yes. Hi, Trudy.
Good morning.
Good morning. We have gone through
7 o'clock in the morning.
we have gone through a question already. We are starting our class right now. And again, I'm saying there was someone who said, "Oh, but a class 2 hours is too long." That was another reason I suggest maybe 1 hour and a half, and then begin a little bit earlier with questions. So not everybody is up to a 2 hours class, especially without a break. We are used in Brazil, we go for 2 hours, 2 hours and a half, because people there, they are very thirsty, very, and but it's not always the case. So we see again, we see how it goes, and if you guys are up to it, we can extend a little later than 4 in 1.5 hours we can end, or we can extend a little longer. It's up to you. Whosoever needs to leave, you leave. You don't need to say anything, just a namaste, and then you go. It's all good, okay? And then I know when I get, when it's a bedtime to close our class. Om Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Payantam Vande Guru Paramparam Ishvara Guru Ushara Guratumiti Murti Veda Vivagine Yomabda Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtiya Namaha Sava Vedanta Sedanta Gocharam Tamagocharam Govindam Paramanandam Ati Guru Pranatosh Maham Om Shanti Shanti. My voice is a bit funny today. We had a long session. I began going to some doctors to see if I can improve my voice, because there is something that when I talk too long, like the seminars in India, 3 weeks, I start losing my voice. And I'm surviving on this one here. It's from India. Very good. Okay. We got through the summary. We got through the introduction, and I'm going to, is there anybody new today here? I was expecting somebody new, but nobody new. And there is Trudy and Gustavo. Mark was not with us last week, I guess.
Sorry, what's that, Arlinda?
Were you with us last week?
Yes, I was. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyhow, last two sessions, last two classes, we went through the introduction. And our introduction, every time we do a class, we do an introduction. And we're gonna go through a short summary. We have established, first of everything, we have established that objects have no value on their own. They are value neutral, as we say. So the same object may shine to me, but it may create a different response to somebody else. It may be an instrument that's going to produce aversion to somebody else while it produces desire to me. So there is no intrinsic joy, happiness, and value in any object. Okay, we give the objects value, and what gives objects values are our vasanas, our likes and dislikes, our preference. That's what gives value. So fundamentally, the objects are empty, are deprived of any value. We project, we give value to the object. We also have understood that once Maya operates, there are two factors in creation. One is the subject and one is the object. So we have looked to see what is a subject, what is an object. And this is the most fundamental, primordial duality produced by Maya, subject, object. Okay? There are two factors operating Mithya, subject and object. We have understood as well that reality is that which never changes and never modifies in any circumstance. Okay? So there are two factors in Mithya. One is the subject, one are the object, and reality is one of these factors that never changes and never modifies to any contact with anything, with any transaction. Okay? Therefore, the subject is the only reality, And the subject is not the mind. The mind is not the subject. Why? Because the mind, although the mind is eternal. Have you heard about that? It's a very good news. The eternal jiva. Have you heard about this concept, the eternal jiva? The eternal soul? So the jiva is eternal. We never die. Okay? We just go from one physical construct to another physical construct, but our mind, our subtle body, it's apart from the physical body when the physical body is no longer functional. Okay? But to continue, it's a new, fresh made, fresh baked body, a jiva body. So the jivas are eternal. And I'm saying that because reality is that which is always ever present. The jiva is always present, okay? But it does not fulfill the other factor, the other description of reality. The other description of reality is the reality is that which is always ever present, like a jiva, but never modifies to experience, never modifies in any circumstance. And as we know, we jivas, we are in constant modification. The jiva modifies every time it transacts with the field of object. So nobody has any doubt about that. So we keep changing, our mind change, our body change. So our notions change, our goals change, our values change, everything changes. So therefore, the mind of the jiva, the intellect of the jiva, is not the ultimate reality. Yeah, the ultimate reality is that which never changes, never modifies, and it's always ever present. This is a very important definition in Vedanta. And we understand that there is one factor and only one factor alone that fits this definition. And this is consciousness, pure consciousness, pure original consciousness, not reflect consciousness. Okay? Pure consciousness is the only factor in existence that fits this definition of never changing, never modifies, always ever present. So we understood that the self that we are, because when we come to Vedanta, we get the knowledge up front. And then later on, we begin our work on how to assimilate, digest, integrate, internalize, and own and retain this knowledge as reality. I am that which never changes, without beginning, without end, never, never, ever modifying, always ever present. So this self, the I am, is the only factor fitting this definition of reality. We also have the term that the self is free, independently, free from everything, for all objects that appear with the scope of its own existence. This conscious existence, this conscious principle we are, is free from any and everything that comes and goes within the scope of our existence without ever becoming dependent, ever becoming entangled with any object. Okay, this consciousness we are never gets dependent, never gets attached, never gets entangled with any object. You excuse me for a moment because it's getting warm here. I begin talking, and then the temperature rises very quickly. Okay. So the self is the factor, is the subject principle that is free from any object. Okay, the object appears within the scope of consciousness, the self, but it does not stick to me. It does not stick to the self. Okay, the self never gets attached, never gets entangled, never gets into a dependent relationship with any object. But how about the mind? Oh, the mind has such a tendency to get identified and attached and dependent on those objects of my preference, right? The mind is the one that gets in that kind of trouble. Okay, but the self is independently free from any objects. The objects are going to be accommodated the same way every object accommodates in space, and the space does not get any affection towards the objects it accommodates. Okay, a beautiful building is created, and I say, oh, very nice building, the highest building of the world. And then somebody decides to bomb it or to destroy it, and then the building comes down. The self is not going to be concerned and sad and depressed. They'll say, oh my God, I accommodate. No, the self or the space in this analogy is absolutely unconcerned with what emerges and what goes. What comes and it goes. It never becomes entangled or dependent. It's the only independent, free. That what we are is the only free, independent factor. Okay? Never getting attached and dependent on any object. Whereas the objects, they have a certain existence, but the existence depends on many other factors and fundamentally depends on the self. Everything depends on consciousness for their existence. Okay? The self is self-existing and does not depend on any object. It never gets attached, never gets entangled, never gets emotionally involved. It's free. This is the meaning of freedom. We have also understood that our true nature is the self. Therefore, we do not need to do any action to gain freedom. So in this introduction, we also came to terms that if the self is free, and if my true nature, my real nature is the self, this consciousness, so I don't need to do anything to gain, to accomplish, to connect. I don't need to travel. I don't need to do any action. Okay, so we understood that as well. We understood this conscious subject principle does not to do any action to become the self and to exercise its true nature as freedom, as moksha. Okay, we don't need to gain moksha because moksha is our very nature. Freedom is our very nature. Limitlessness is our very nature. What is the nature of something? The nature of something is that without which that is no longer that. So what's the nature of fire? So say that fire, the nature of fire is heat. Okay? They'll say, oh, it's okay. Most fires have heat. But I want to come up with a cool fire, a fire that has no heat at all. Okay? I still want to cook my food. I want to see those beautiful flames, but I want it cool. I don't want the heat of the flames. Okay? So if you remove the heat from the fire, you're going to remove the fire altogether because the fire is not a fire without its nature as heat. Okay? Therefore, our nature is limitless freedom. Okay? And the nature of something is something that cannot be taken from us, because if we take it from us, so we are no longer the self. Okay? If it cannot be taken from us, it does not need to be regained by us. Okay? It's our very nature. It's our own existence. It's the very, very source of our existence. Okay? It's our nature. We don't need to do anything to produce or gain any action to gain our moksha, our freedom. So all of the above just mentioned brought us to the conclusion that only conscious, only knowledge or knowledge or understanding in regards of my real nature, as we said, the nature, like my fundamental essential nature, only the knowledge, the understanding is going to solve this problem, because I'm not satisfied. Otherwise, we would not be here thinking like, spiritual seekers, and I want to find the self, I want to gain the self, I want to retain the self, I want to be free, I want my moksha, and so on. We wouldn't be here if it was not for this desire. Okay? So we came to the conclusion that this freedom as our very nature cannot be gained, cannot be produced, it cannot be accomplished, because it is our very nature. But yet, the jiva, under the spell of ignorance, cannot really enjoy and appreciate its true nature as freedom. It's misidentified with the body-mind complex, and it believes to be the body. Therefore, there is only one way to resolve it, since the jiva is already this freedom, is already this moksha, is by the means of understanding that we are the 10th man, understanding that we are already free. And this sounds very simple, but like Ramji likes to say, it's very simple, but it's not easy. Okay? It's very simple, but it's not that easy. Why it's not that easy? Because ignorance, these wrong, misleading notions about referring to our nature, our true nature, they are very deeply rooted into our minds. Therefore, it takes some time to uproot those notions. It takes some work. And when we come to Vedanta, the work we do is the work of study, contemplation, reflection, and then application of knowledge, assimilation of knowledge, resolution of doubts, and so on. So it can only be gained by the means of intellectual knowledge. But this self-knowledge, although happening in the intellect, it's not a mere intellectual knowledge. It's what we call direct and immediate knowledge, a direct and immediate recognition, a direct and immediate seeing. Okay? Like the rishis, they're called the seers. The ones who heard is when you see something not through your eyes. When you see something clear in your mind, you say, whoa, how could I have missed it for so long? Okay? So it happens through this cognitive power of our intellect by the means of discrimination and so on. So therefore, we end up with the recognition that we need. We are already what we are seeking. We are the self. We are already free. But since this knowledge is covered by this veil of ignorance, known by avidya, an effect of maya, excess of rajas and tamas operating in the subtle body of the jiva, in the mind of the jiva. So due to all these mental impurities, we have a difficulty to retain this knowledge, okay? We need more than just hear that once and that's it. You see, in the direct path spiritual movement, there are a lot of people, and I have been to some of those teachers that just say the same, you are consciousness, there is only consciousness, and you are that, and be over with it, okay? Go home, live your life, that's all you need to know. But in most cases, it never really helps anybody because this ignorance requires some more work. It's deeply rooted, okay, in our mind. It's we come to understand that only by the means of knowledge, and this means of knowledge, it needs to be applied systematically with a lot of dedication and persistence and so on, with the help of a teacher as well. Okay, so the scriptures, the scriptural knowledge has to be unfolded. The individual has to go through the stage of manana, which is listening to the teachings, and then reflecting, contemplating, resolving doubts, and slowly, as the doubts they dissipate, the individual begins developing this certainty of knowledge that I am the light, I am the consciousness, and I'm free from the mind and everything else. Okay, it requires some work. It takes a little time. Okay, we need a means of knowledge, and Vedanta is this means of knowledge. And like in any other field of knowledge, we need a means of knowledge for a certain object of knowledge, and then we need another medium, which is a teacher, somebody who conveys this knowledge. And in the case of the scriptural knowledge, the teacher is extremely necessary because this knowledge, as we said, is simple, but it's very subtle, and it appears very contradictory here and there. There are a lot of apparent contradictions that needs to be resolved, and the function, the purpose of the teacher is not only to unfold the teachings to the best of one's ability, but also to help the student to clear the doubts, the questions. But fundamentally, the student is the only one who can do the work and clear the mind of all doubts and remove one's own ignorance. Okay, we also need a competent teacher. We need a means of knowledge. We have to understand that only by knowledge, not by action, the self can be realized. The self is the only free, limitless, beyond death and birth and death. And I am the self, therefore I want to recognize and retain this knowledge clearly with a full conviction, because I want to enjoy, I want to appreciate and enjoy the fact of my immortal being as the self. So all of that brings us to the text. Tattva Bodha, knowledge of the truth. Bodha means knowledge. And in this context, Tattva means the truth. So, but what is the truth? Truth is that which is eternal, exists independent, and does not change. We have just defined what is reality. Reality is truth. Sat is the truth. It's the reality. Okay? It's existence. It's that which is eternal, no beginning, no middle, no end, and exists independently of all other factors, okay, and never modifies. It remains unchanged. So it's very important that we understand that what we are never changed. because with change, there is always a possibility of change for better or worse, right? Any change may be a positive change or negative change. Things can go up, can go down, can be north, can go north, can go south. So we don't change. We don't need to be concerned about that. We are eternally present as this conscious principle that never changes and never gets entangled. We are always free from everything and anybody. We are free from people, places, things, events, circumstances. We are free from everything. This is the definition of reality, which is the definition of truth. Truth is that which is eternal. Only the self fits this definition. So knowledge of the truth is knowledge of the self. So this text written or verbalized by Shankara on those days, called Tattva Bodha, it means knowledge of the self, or in other words, self-knowledge, knowledge of the truth. And the self is the only truth, the only reality, and we want to have this knowledge of the self, but we don't want to have the knowledge of the self so that I can say, oh, now I know everything about the self. No? Does that help? Oh, now I got so much knowledge about the self. No, it does not help. I need to have the knowledge of the self as myself, okay? I can only realize and know the self as myself, because the self can never be seen as an object other than myself, because the self is the knower, it's not the known, it's always the perceiver, the knower, never the perceived, never the known. So this is the simple knowledge that is absolutely simple and obvious, but yet very, very subtle, that escapes most of us. So we begin our text, every one of our starts with an invocation. The invocation of this text. By the way, everybody got the Tattva Bodha text. I send again another email. So we have salutations to the self, the bestower of knowledge in the form of the teacher. This treasures, the knowledge of truth, is for the benefit of qualified seekers of liberation. So, this treatise, the knowledge of the truth, no? The knowledge of the self. This treatise about self-knowledge, self-inquiry, self-knowledge is for the benefit of the entire entire humanity. No, I mean, the humanity benefits indirectly, but directly it is for the benefit of those rare individuals that are qualified for Vedanta, qualified for liberation. Okay? That's how things are. At the beginning, we usually find a verse that tells the purpose of every one of these texts. Who it is intended, and for whom it is, and what is intended for, and the benefit to be derived from this understanding, from this knowledge. What is the benefit gained from this knowledge? The benefit?
Moksha, freedom.
Freedom, moksha, of course. So we understood that there is the self, we heard that it's my very nature, otherwise, therefore, I want to have this knowledge very, very clear in my mind, because I want to appreciate and enjoy my freedom and my limitlessness. Okay, this is called moksha. The result of this inquiry, the result of this work, of this study, is moksha. The benefit is moksha. This is the benefit to be derived when we come to Vedanta. This is the results of Jnana Pala. When we karmi, when we do karma yoga and other yogas, we get the results of karma, which is karma pala. Okay, it's always an experience or a better circumstance or a better situation. Some nice punya here, punya there. But when we come to Vedanta, the result of our efforts is called Jnana-pala, results of contemplation, results of knowledge. So we get self-knowledge. The benefit to be derived is freedom from existential suffering. So most human beings, whether we accept, whether we admit it or not, we are not satisfied with our lives because there is a good chunk of suffering involved. Okay, there are a lot of things that we are really not enjoying. The way we feel about ourselves and the world, my mental, emotional condition, and so there are so many aspects in our living human experience that are synonymous of suffering, psychological suffering. So fundamentally, the benefit to be derived is freedom from suffering, okay? Existential, psychological suffering. So this invocation says salutations to the teacher. So the teacher is nothing but someone who helps the student by unfolding the meaning of the verse. It helps the student to work on his or her own ignorance and remove it. Okay? When we talk in terms of ignorance, it's not ignorance about any field of knowledge, not my ignorance or your ignorance about mathematics or chemistry or anything. No, we always refer to the fundamental ignorance, which is the ignorance of the real nature of the I, this I that we repeat over and over again. Okay? So the purpose of the teacher is to help the student to remove this self-ignorance, the ignorance in respect to this I. Okay? And the teacher does that by unfolding the meaning of the teachings to the best of his or her ability, of course. So the word guru is composed by two words. One is gu and another is ru. Okay, so gu go for darkness. Okay, darkness is a big, huge symbol of ignorance. Okay, so darkness is the opposite of light. Light is a symbol of consciousness, of wisdom. Okay. Because in the light of wisdom, things are known and revealed. Okay? But in darkness, nothing can be known and revealed. So therefore, darkness is a beautiful symbol of ignorance. And the word guru is ignorance or darkness, and ru, that factor that removes or neutralizes or cancels this ignorance. And the word guru means the removal of ignorance. That is the literal meaning of this word, guru. So, but what is that which really removes ignorance? Huh? If you guys help me.
Knowledge.
Knowledge, Mark, you are really on.
Yeah, right.
So the only thing that can remove ignorance is knowledge. Okay? And then who or what is the guru?
He's the wielder of the knowledge.
The guru is the wielder of the knowledge, but more fundamentally is the body of knowledge called the scriptural knowledge of the Upanishads. Okay? Is this Vedanta text, is the scriptural knowledge is what, by the means and with the help of a teacher, has the potential of remove the ignorance of the student But it's not enough. The means of knowledge is there, the scriptural knowledge, the link, the guy who tries to explain the meanings of those statements, the meanings of those explanations of the scriptures. Okay, the guy is there, the scripture is there, but yet only the individual can remove its own ignorance. So fundamentally, the guru is the scripture. Even more fundamentally, the guru, as we often say, is always Ishwara, because Ishwara is the one who has revealed this scriptural knowledge to the jivas. Then we have Ishwara, we have the guru, we have Ishwara, the scriptural knowledge, the guru, and the student at the very end of this line is his own guru. That's why we like to say in the end, the student has to become one's own guru, because only the student can really remove his or her own ignorance. Nobody else can do it for us. It's not good news? It is good news, huh?
It is good news, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people think, oh, it's bad news because I was hoping that I was going to a guru and the guru would do the work for me. Oh, and then it's bad news for you, right? But you understand that moksha is only possible by the means of one's personal effort. It's a meritorious effect system where you gain all of the results of your effort. Then it can only be by the means of your own effort, of one's own effort, of one's own study, contemplation, assimilation, application, and so on. But we also heard that the teachings on self-knowledge require a teacher. Why is it so important, the teacher? Because without the teacher, it's very common that the teachings, the scriptures, the books, the texts, they are going to be misinterpreted. They are going to be misunderstood. Okay? They are going to be filtered by one's own spiritual notions. Our notions, our bias are going to filter, are going to, cut corners and come to certain conclusions and so on. It's going to suppress that which was not clearly understood. If we don't really do like Stephen did today, no, I want to go through these doubts. I want to dig a little bit deeper. If we don't do that, you say, it's not important, this doubt. Oh, I did not understand that, but it's okay. Then we push it, but it remains there, and it's going to undermine our certainty of knowledge, our conviction of self-knowledge. So we need to have a teacher, because the teacher is going to help us to resolve these doubts. It's going to help us to understand the meanings of those verses, of those teachings. Okay? Without the teacher, it's very, very difficult that we can gain the moksha that was already our own. Better to say, without a teacher, it's much more difficult we succeed in removing this ignorance, okay? Neutralizing and removing this ignorance. It's more difficult for the reasons I just mentioned. We're going to filter Vedanta. We're going to try to accept those notions that somehow fit my spiritual conditioning or spiritual program. And I'm going to reject all those statements of the Upanishads that are not in harmony with everything that I heard after 20, 30, 40 years of spiritual pursuit. Okay? So we need a teacher who is familiarized with the scriptural knowledge of Vedanta, and we need certain more factors that we're going to mention soon. The teachings are very simple, but they are very subtle. And it appears to be contradictory, as we mentioned before. There are a lot of contradictions. Okay, just to mention a few examples. I have been studying the Gita and unfolding the teachings of the Gitas to our group in Brazil. We've been doing that already for over a year. And in, in the Gita, Krishna presents himself sometimes as a jiva, as an individual, as a friend of Arjuna. And it's, hey, buddy, so what are you going to do today? So, okay, you want me to drive your chariot and I'm going to serve you. So sometimes, several times, he addressed Arjuna from the standpoint of Arjuna's friends who is driving his chariot, okay? He's riding the horse, the 3 horse, or the 5 horse, representing the 5 sense organs. Okay. Some other times he makes statements, and the I he refers there is Ishwara, the Lord. Ishwara, the Lord of the universe, the lawgiver, the one who provides us with the results of our actions. Okay. So he talks as Ishwara, the Lord of the universe, Krishna. I'm getting so mixed up, especially today, between the Portuguese that I use for this class and the English. Anyhow, sometimes it's Krishna, sometimes he is just the friend of Arjuna, sometimes he is Ishwara, the law, the one who delivers the results of our actions, our karma, our parabdha karma, the Lord of this universe. And sometimes he talks and he presents himself as I, the only reality, the substratum, no? The most fundamental substratum, that which is beyond Jiva, Ishwara, and Jagata. Everything, the absolute I, consciousness, pure consciousness. So when we start the Gita, we need to understand that there are 3 angles, 3 levels of reality, let's say, 3 different orders. And sometimes Krishna is going to talk from one of these 3, and we need to somehow discern it and understand. And the teacher helps the student not to get confused, because the most common thing is like, oh my God, but Krishna said that before, and now he's saying this. He said he said that as a Krishna, okay? Friend of Arjuna. Later on, he said that as Krishna, Ishwara, the Lord of the universe. And now he's saying this, that seems to be paradox. He's saying that as Brahman, as Paramatma, that which does not do anything, at the same time, that which is free from everything, doing nothing, but yet nothing happens without its conscious existence. So we need to understand this apparent paradox, okay? So we see this paradox with free will as well. Does free will exist or does not exist? Right? It's a very common problem. So it does exist from one angle and does not exist from another angle. Last week we touched it a little bit before we closed our class. So from the standpoint of the jiva that is called to respond to the stimuli coming from the field, life is not nothing but stimuli and response. When we need to respond, so the jiva has this ability to respond, to choose its response. I'm going to do this or that, I'm going to follow my nature or follow my vasana, I'm going to follow the dharma, or I want what I want because I want. Okay, so the jiva, every moment he has the possibility to exercise, he's called to exercise its free will, his ability to choose how to respond. Okay, so the free will exists when we are called to respond to the field, but when we are just receiving our parabdha karma, our life circumstance, the results of our previous actions, actions or even past lives, when everything is fructifying as my Parabodha karma. So we say the jiva has no free will, because that is called faith. But faith is nothing but the results of the actions that I bring into the field on a daily, moment-to-moment basis. Okay? And then free will exists from the standpoint of jiva, but from the standpoint of Ishvara, there is no free will. Why? Because Ishvara is the only one who delivers our Prarabdha karma, the results of, and it's a very complex equation, okay? Because our karmas, they intertwine with everybody else karma around us. Everything in the field affects everything else. But yet, Ishvara has this incredible formula, incredible computer program that he knows very, very easily how to deliver the exact result of every jiva. So it's a perfect computer, not subject to even a virus. There is no virus in that case with Ishvara's computer. Okay? This is another example. So a lot of the time we hear Ramji saying when somebody asks him a question, a paradoxical question to be understood, they say, oh, but this is like this, it's like this, and then he said yes and no. Now, how many times do we hear that? Because it depends from which angle, which perspective we look into things. There is never something like an absolute cause. There is never something like an absolute effect. Okay? Life is a continuous flow of cause and effect, in which the cause now becomes an effect, and the effect becomes a cause. Okay? Today is the effect of yesterday, and today becomes the cause of tomorrow. Okay? So the teacher is not absolutely a teacher, even the most brilliant teachers. Okay? The teacher in reference to his students, but he's a student in reference to his own teacher, his own guru. Okay? Likewise, everything in life is like that. Okay? The seed is an effect of the tree, but at the same time, it becomes the cause of the tree. Okay? Depends from where we stand. Right? All these apparent contradictions, they need to be understood and resolved so that the student can develop a firm knowledge, a knowledge with a firm conviction, without all these questions, doubts, uncertainties, suspiciousness in reference to those declarations and statements of the scripture. Very important. Okay. So in a non-dual reality, everything is the self. So when we do namaskara, for example, we bow to the teacher. Now we are referring to the teacher, because very often in our tradition we do namaskara. You see, I was from the very beginning, even before I got in contact with Vedanta, I was allergic to namaste, namaskara, because I used to see people doing it right and left, as a means of adoration to a certain father, mother figure known as the guru. People would give everything, their life, the money, and the bodies, and everything to the guru. They would do namaskara, they would throw themselves prostrate in front of the teacher, and so on. In other words, I used to see and understand and feel like people give their power away to the teacher by becoming this phenomenon called, adoration to the guru. You see, in the West, the concept of the bhakti, of devotion, was not properly understood, because in the West, we don't have the Vedic culture in the West. In India, the bhakta, the devote or devotion is properly exercised by the means of namaskara. Everybody does namaste to one another. Okay, and that is only a mean to say, hey, there is only one God, and the God in me salutes the God in you. Okay, there's nothing about, of course, it's also an act of humility to just do namaskara and bow a little bit to a teacher, someone you respect, your parents, and so on. Okay, like they do in India. But in the West, because the notion of Ishvara, God, was somehow thrown away, so the guru became the God. All these gurus, it was enough to grow a beard and learn how to behave as a guru, and then you would have a following, and this following would do namaskara and throw themselves food and so on. All these things that we see around, these large groups, these large sanghas. So I was always a little bit allergic, but there is something beautiful about namaskara, which is an expression of a declaration of non-duality. You come like two, become one self, and I salute this self in me, which is the same self that lives in every living being. Okay? So when we do namaste or bow to the teacher, we are bound to the self that the teacher represents. We are also acknowledging that the teaching comes to you by the grace of the teacher, and it came to the teacher by the grace of his teacher, and and his teacher from his teacher, and it goes forever until we come all the way up to or down to Ishvara. Okay? Ishvara, this conscious living being that revealed this knowledge to the rishis. So with this prayer, salutations to the self, the bestower of knowledge in the form of the teacher, this treatise, the knowledge of the truth, the knowledge of the self, is for the benefit of those in search of moksha, qualified seekers in search of moksha. When we do our prayer, our invocation, we are expressing our gratitude to the tradition, to the sampradaya, to this continuous flow of teachers that pass around to teachers and pass on to teachers and teachers and teachers and teachers and teachers all the way to Ishvara. We are grateful that this knowledge, this tradition, this body of knowledge, this means of knowledge, this teaching methodology remained intact and alive so that we can also benefit now. So we just say, we bow down to Ishvara, the teacher, to the scriptures which was unfolded and revealed by Ishvara, and from the teacher who is helping to unfold these verses. Okay? It's passed, the tradition preserved and passed the teaching on, making it possible for us to be benefited by this teaching. The purpose of this text is the knowledge of truth for the benefit of the qualified seekers for liberation. Why it is important to mention something about that is because Tattva Bodha does not address Vipassana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Dharma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. There is no doing, there are no pujas, there is nothing. There is not even Karma Yoga. There is no preparatory yoga. Okay? So when we need a text that helps us to develop these qualifications, we better go to the Gita. Bhagavad Gita is a text that combines Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga. Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga. Okay? So it helps us to develop a certain attitude, mental emotion attitude, mental emotion religious, spiritual attitude that serves the purpose to purify the mind. Okay? But in the case of the Tattva Bodha, although it's considered to be an introductory text, we don't deal with any of those preparatory texts or sadhanas. Okay? So therefore, it is for the benefit of the qualified seekers for liberation. Okay? So Jnana Yoga, this is Jnana Yoga. It's the path of contemplation, reflection, and understanding, and getting free. This path, which is a pathless path, okay, because a path is something that implies taking steps from A point to a B point. So in Vedanta, we call it the pathless path. There is no question of traveling. It's only a question of contemplating and understanding and recognizing and enjoy your freedom. So it's for the benefit of those qualified seekers. Tattva Bodha does not address those preparatory sadhanas. Okay? Tattva Bodha is Jnana Yoga, it's knowledge yoga. It does not involve any doing or experiences, although they are conducive to a life of good actions, of dharmic actions, and good experience as well. Okay? So, Jnana Yoga, the yoga of the contemplation, understanding, assimilation, and knowledge, it's not a doing, but it's conducive to a life in which our actions are going to be good actions, dharmic actions, and our experience are going to be overall good experience as well. Self-knowledge, knowledge of the self, is present here for those students seeking freedom. This direct means of attaining freedom is the discrimination between the self and the apparent self. So discrimination, now we use for the first time the word discrimination. This direct means of attaining freedom is possible by the means of discrimination between the self and the not self. The not self we like to call the apparent self, okay, rather than the not self, although the scriptures of Vedanta address often as the not self, the not real self. Okay? It's a discrimination between Atma and Anatma, the self and the not self. This method of discrimination, which will be unfolded in this text, is for those.
It's 8 hours.
It's for those endowed with certain qualifications. So now we came to the point. Okay, this is for those seekers. Our invocation says qualified seekers for liberation. Okay, qualified seekers. What are those qualifications? And now we get into that. Okay, so in order to gain this knowledge and to retain this knowledge, we go through a method called the discrimination between the real and the unreal, discrimination between the subject and the object. Okay, and for that we need to have, to a certain degree, certain extent, some mental, emotional qualifications developed, and they are called the fourfold qualifications. Okay, freedom is attained only by the means of knowledge, and it's arrived by only the means of discrimination between the real and not real, the self and the not self, the real subject from all objects. That's the only mean. That's why discrimination always comes at the very top of our list of qualifications. By discrimination, but discrimination is only possible for those who are properly qualified, mentally prepared. For this reason, text begins with a list of required qualifications. They are essential prerequisites. Everyone possesses these qualities. We all possess this quality, for example. Discrimination. We all know what discrimination is. It's a mental, it's an intellectual faculty of determining, of choosing, of discerning. Okay, we need all the time, we are called to question and decide and determine and so on. So this faculty we have, but we exercise it on a moment to moment in our mind, in our life. We are discriminating or determining or discerning. So what I'm going to buy, what I'm going to cook for lunch and so on, what I want today, what I don't want. So we have those qualifications, those mental qualities, intellectual qualities. It's just a question of turning them more purified, turning them more subtle, because the discrimination between the subject, the real subject, and all objects, the discrimination between the real and the apparently real, is an extremely subtle sort of discrimination. Therefore, we need to purify this intellect and develop this subtlety of discrimination that will allow us to discriminate the self from the appearance self called the mind. And it's important to understand that these qualifications, when we look into them, in some texts, some books, some writers, they present 4, some others they present 10, some others 20, and so on. So it's not that we need to develop fully all of those qualifications. Okay? Every one of us is a different construct with different tendencies, mental limitations, mental capabilities, and so on. And we develop some of these. And as we're going to see at the very end, the most important of these qualifications is an intense desire to know and be free. This is the most intense, the most important of all qualifications, okay? The methods for developing these qualifications we are not discussing in this text are karma yoga, meditation, and devotional practice, and so on. These are the methods to develop these qualifications. But I would like to say as well that even when sometimes we jump into Jnana Yoga without having our qualifications fully developed, we still benefit and develop to a certain extent those qualifications. So, in other words, Jnana Yoga is a great purifier of the mind. Okay? It helps to prepare, to qualify the mind. Jnana Yoga itself helps, because when we start reasoning, following the logic of Vedanta, in spite of our mental limitation, by doing that, some assimilation takes place. And these assimilations, they naturally purify the mind, gradually purifying the mind, okay? Even you may not gain the moksha, the freedom, the enlightenment that you want. What's the purpose of Vedanta? Is to free the jiva, to help the jiva to recognize, appreciate, and enjoy moksha, one's own nature as limitless moksha, limitless freedom, okay? So even if we don't get that Yanapala, that result of my investigation, but we gain some purification, some preparatedness, okay? Some purification, some maturity, some purification, okay? So it does the job of developing qualifications. So the fourfold qualifications, many times they are referred to as the 4 Ds. 4 Ds. Okay. The first one is discrimination. It's always at the top because it's the most fundamental. We're going to use this tool to the very, very end of our journey. The second is called dispassion. The third one is called discipline. And in the discipline field, in the discipline qualities, there is a sixfold sub-qualification on the discipline. So the 4 Ds are discrimination, dispassion, discipline, and desire. So I say before, so desire is the most important of all these qualifications. And I say that based on my own experience, first-hand experience, because I did not have many of these qualifications developed. I'm not a very bright, very intelligent, or genius or anything, but I had a burning desire that I was ready to give anything for this self-knowledge after 30 years of effort. Okay, so when this desire is really intense, like burning, you only think it becomes an obsession. Sometimes that intensity of desire for moksha does the job. You understand? Does the job in developing other qualification. Okay? There's no such a thing as all the qualifications fully developed, 100% development. They are not really necessary. There's no such a thing as a 100% sattvic mind. We just need to purify, to improve the mind, bring the mind to a more subtle, contemplative condition so that it can do efficiently this work and gain this knowledge and retain this knowledge. What is discrimination then? Is the understanding that the self alone is eternal and unchanging. Why is it important? Because the self is our goal. Because we heard that the self is that which is eternal. It never dies. No? Don't like, jivas do not like this concept of mortality. Nobody's happy about this notion of one day I need to go. The jiva is the self identified with the body-mind complex. And it suffers this, psychologically suffers this difficulty of putting up this notion that one day I, the construct, I'm gonna go. I'm born, I grow, and I go. We don't like it. So therefore, we need to realize our true nature. The self is that which is always ever present, eternally, and does not change. It is limitless. Okay? Discrimination is the understanding that only the self represents that which is going to give you full satisfaction. Everything that we search out there in the field of object is limited. It's not limitless. Okay? It's not. It's always changing. It's always decaying. It's always going down. Okay? So in the field of objects, nothing is eternal. Nothing is unchanged. Only the self. And I want that which is eternal and limitless. Because if I know myself as this limitless, eternal, conscious subject principle, and then I know that I am free, because freedom resides only in this factor called the conscious subject principle, called consciousness of the self. So discrimination is based on the understanding that only the self is really free, really unlimited, and so on. And everything that appears within me is an object, and they are limited by time, space, and by many other means. Therefore, I need to discriminate. I need to separate everything I got mixed up, I got confused, entangled with, and I need to separate it only for the sake of isolating the self Okay? Oh, yes, I mean, I'm going to discriminate, and then I isolate the self, and then I remain here enjoying the self. No, you need to discriminate for the sake of isolate the self so that you can claim your identity as the self. Okay? So we discriminate, we for the sake of isolate the self so that we can claim our true identity as this conscious subject, limitless, free, never changing, conscious principle. Okay? Only the self is real. Everything else is not real. Everything else is limit, is finite. It's always change. It's unpredictable. Anything can happen with the body. The body's health today. I have seen people in the spiritual world not only doing everything right, yoga, meditations, and everything, but also eating the best organic food possible in California, only organic food and so on. The best of the best. And then out of the blue, this young lady, she's diagnosed with a cancer. And after months or years, she died. Nobody could believe. I mean, how could she die if she was doing everything right? So in the field of the objects, you cannot count on anything. Things, they move, they change, and they are unpredictable. Okay? So if we just depend on the field, you're in trouble. You are setting yourself up for trouble. Okay? So, in Vedanta, the term for real is satya, a word used to describe the nature of the self. Satya means existence, or that which exists independently, that which enjoys an independent existence. Okay? So, to use the example, the analogy of the clay and the clay cup. So the clay cup exists, but the clay cup does not enjoy an independent existence. The clay cup enjoys a dependable existence. Okay? The clay cup depends on the clay to enjoy its existence as a clay cup. So the self is that which enjoys an independent existence, and all other objects enjoy a borrowed existence. Okay? So the self is the only reality, that which enjoys an independent existence. And everything else is called mithya, or an apparent reality. They have an existence that is borrowed by on the self. Okay? Depends on the self for its own sustenance, existence. So the self is, in that sense, like the clay. Is satya. Satya enjoys its own existence independent of the shape and form that the artist will give to it. Similarly, the satya is the self existence, free, independent existence. It exists independently before, during, and after all names and forms comes into place. For any names and forms comes into place, a bar of gold enjoys its existence as pure gold. And then comes someone and turns that gold bar in hundreds of different ornaments, gold ornaments. Right? So these ornaments are going to enjoy their existence as a name and a form, but that name and that form depends on the substance called gold, the only reality of each one of those ornaments. So likewise, all names and forms, including the name given to our body-mind construct, okay? All this name and form, they enjoy a borrowed existence. And who is borrowing existence to our body-mind? I. The real subject conscious principle, consciousness. The only reality, Satya, that never changes. Understand the distinction, the relationship between Satya and Mithya is fundamental for us to do our discrimination, the discrimination between Satya and Mithya. That which is real from that which is apparently real, that which is independently real from that which has a dependable or dependent reality, a borrowed reality, okay? That which is free from any change to that which constantly changes, okay? To investigate further, think about this. When you experience a tree, your body or thought, there is consciousness plus a tree, consciousness plus a body, and consciousness plus a thought. Any object, we saw that we have this object, this brush that I use. So we have this brush, and we came to terms, we came to agree that the brush exists not separate from my mind, and the mind is not apart from consciousness. Therefore, the brush is not separate from consciousness. Okay? If the body is not separate from my mind, not separate from consciousness, now how am I going to separate or discriminate the consciousness from the brush? Okay? So every one of these objects come into existence, stay for some time and disappears, and they change. Every thought, every object that appears in our consciousness appears, and immediately after some time, and they are replaced by another object, and then by another object, and the way on and on. Okay? These objects that are not different from the thought of the object, they change continuously, and they appear in our mind. They appear against a background that is unchanging. This background is unchanging. Ever-present background is what we call existence. Okay? They come into existence, stay for a while. Okay? It's a combination. When we experience an object, it's a consciousness plus the object. It's a consciousness, of course, plus the mind, plus the object. Okay? So the only thing that does not change in this equation is consciousness, mind, the sense organs, the object. Everything is changed down the line. The only thing that does not change is this consciousness. Okay? And while the objects exist for a certain period of time, they are subject to change, decay, and disappearance. So what it tells us, it tells that everything that comes into the scope of my conscious, subconscious principle, subjective conscious existence, this conscious subject, everything that comes within the scope of this conscious principle is mithya, because it comes, it stays for some time, it decays and it goes, it's replaced, it lives for some time. Every thought lives for a certain period of time, and then it goes, it's replaced. So they are all mithya, they appear and disappear. They have a temporary, impermanent existence, a borrowed existence. But what about the consciousness which is always present in every one of these experiences? There are so many objects of experience. Experience is just consciousness with the aids of the mind associating to a thought object. So the objects are changing, but how about the consciousness? Okay, consciousness is that which is the same before the appearance of the brush, before the brush is replaced by this, before the cup is replaced by the mouse. Consciousness is that like the screen on which the pictures are projected in the cinema hall, the consciousness remains without any change, unaffected. Okay? Nothing is going to stain this consciousness, nothing is going to stick to it. It's the only thing that does not get associated, entangled, or affected or dependent on any object. That is satya, and the objects are amitya. Okay? Another way to look at it is that every object that comes into the scope of my consciousness, it comes illumined by consciousness. Okay? If you think about that, the conclusion is that that an object can only be said to exist when it's seen in the light of consciousness. And consciousness alone shines, and within its light, it illumines and reveals the object. So from the standpoint of the jiva, consciousness needs to be present so that the object can exist as an object in reference to a jiva. Okay? We had this conversation before with Steven. An object in this equation between the knower of an object and object, the object can only be said to be known, can only be said to exist in the presence of a conscious being, of consciousness. Right? We need a conscious principle so that the object can be said to exist. Object can be known. Consciousness is what reveals and knows fundamentally. Okay, consciousness. So this is another way to look and see what is satya and what is mithya, and why any and all objects are just mithya. They are apparently real. They come, they stay, and they go. And that which we want to realize and gain firmly as a firm knowledge is satya, my existence as that conscious subject principle that never changes and never goes. So there are no objects that can reveal themselves, right? Following the same line, so there are many objects. Is there any object that is self-revealing? No. Every object requires another principle that reveals the object. Okay? So every object can be known by the means of this revealing, knowing principle called consciousness. The object cannot reveal themselves without consciousness. So the object depends on consciousness for their existence. But does consciousness depend on the object to exist? No. Consciousness is the only principle that is self-revealing, self-luminous, self-present, self-evident. Okay, it's always ever shining. When there is something to illumine, it will illuminate through the minds of its jivas. But if there is nothing, it remains just in joy. It is self-luminous existence. Consciousness is satya, independently existent, and the objects of mithya depend on satya for their apparent existence. Okay, everything is made out of satya, of consciousness, and it appears within capture into consciousness, and it's known by consciousness. So consciousness is free, and all objects depend on consciousness. Consciousness is a word that refers to the nature of the self. It's an independent entity which enlivens, illumines, and reveals the body. Okay? And furthermore, it's the self which reveals the parts and properties and the products and functions of all objects. Okay? This in reference to the fact that the scriptures say that consciousness is not a part, property, or product of any object, because we may say that, oh, there are some objects that may produce consciousness, and the most common misconception is that the brain or the body may generate consciousness, that the consciousness is a product, is a byproduct, is a property, is a part of the body. No, consciousness is an independent entity, independent principle. It's self-knowledge, self-knowing, it's self-luminous, it's self-existing, and it borrows its light, borrows its existence, borrows its consciousness to all objects. Okay, let's move to dispassion. Do we have any questions? No? Dispassion is a positive indifference in reference to the results of my actions. So we mentioned that last time a little bit. Dispassion is an ability that we have of not overreacting when the results of my actions are not according to my expectation. Every one of us do actions aiming to a certain result. Our goal is to gain something through our actions. If we are karmi, we want to do self-centered actions to gain results that are going to benefit me a lot. If we are yogi, we're going to do kind of actions with the spirit of karma yoga, the benefit of not only myself, but the other living beings and the environment. But regardless, every action we do is done with the intent of achieving some result. So every time the results of our actions are not in harmony with our expectations, we have the possibility of reacting violently. We may fall into depression or become violent, emotionally violent, or get angry or something like that. So this ability to not overreact whenever we face adversities in our lives is called dispassion. Okay? Why? Because life is a game of constant interaction with the field in which you act and then you gain the results of your action. You act and you gain the results of your action. And a lot of the time, what we gain as our prabhada karma is not really in conformity with what I desired. Okay? So when they are not happening according to my expectation, which is a lot of the time, if I don't have this qualification, my mind is going to be very often disturbed. Because when we overreact mentally, emotionally, the mind gets disturbed, and the disturbed mind makes mistakes. It cannot read the situation properly. It cannot discriminate properly. It cannot say the right thing. Okay? So a disturbed mind is a mind that's going to respond to the field in a way that is going to create more undesirable results, which is going to affect negatively more and more the mind. It's going to disturb the mind. So we want to have a mind that is settled, okay, so that it can read and can respond, can discriminate, can gain self-knowledge, and can be free. So this second qualification called dispassion is one of the most